There are things a man carries for so long that they stop feeling like burdens. They just become part of the weight of being alive. I was 63 years old, the morning my daughter stood up at my retirement party and told a room full of people that I had ruined her life. She didn't whisper it. She didn't pull me aside. Afterward. And she picked up a microphone in front of my colleagues, my neighbors, my oldest friends, and she said, with a steadiness that still haunts me, "My father chose his career over his family every single day for 30 years. And I am done pretending to be grateful for the scraps he left behind." The room went silent the way rooms only go silent when something irreversible has just happened. I sat there at the head of the table, my hands flat on the white tablecloth, and I did not say a word. I had spent a lifetime not saying words. I was very good at it by then. What my daughter Rachel did not know, what she could not have known, was that there was a sealed envelope in the breast pocket of my jacket. I had carried it there for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to give it to her. I had written it, myself, 18, 18, 18. And inside it was the only explanation I had ever been able to put into language for everything I had done and everything I had allowed her to believe about me. She walked out of the banquet hall before the cake was cut. I finished my glass of water, thanked the people who stayed, shook the hands I needed to shake, and I went home alone. I want to tell you the whole story, because you deserve to understand how a father and a daughter can love each other so completely and wound each other so deeply, sometimes without either one of them understanding what is actually happening until it is almost too late. My name is Gerald. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the youngest of 4 boys in a household where money was counted carefully and affection was given in the form of work ethic rather than words. My father fixed appliances for a living, and my mother kept the house and kept us. Nobody in my family talked about feelings. We talked about responsibilities. I met Margaret in 1986 at a community college night class. We were both taking accounting fundamentals, of all things. She was 24, I was 25. She had red hair and a laugh that sounded like she meant it, which was the rarest thing I had ever encountered. We were married 11 months later in a small ceremony at her parents' house in Columbus. Rachel was born 2 years after that. I remember the first time I held her. She was 6 pounds and 11 ounces, and she looked up at me with these enormous dark eyes, and I genuinely thought that I understood for the first time what I was supposed to be doing on this earth. Nothing in my life before that moment had felt as clear and as certain as that child in my arms. I want you to hold on to that, because what happened in the years that followed made Rachel doubt that it was ever true, and for a long time I did not know how to prove that it was. When Rachel was 4 years old, my brother Dennis came to me with a problem. Dennis was 3 years older than me. He had always been the bright one, the ambitious one, the one my father talked about at dinner. He had started a small construction business in Cincinnati, and for a few years it looked like he was going to build something real. He had a crew, he had contracts, he had a good reputation. He also had a gambling problem that no one in our family had been willing to name out loud. He came to me on a Tuesday night in March. He sat at my kitchen table while Margaret put Rachel to bed, and he told me what he had done. He had taken money from a client's escrow account to cover a debt. Not a small amount. Enough that if it came out, he was looking at criminal charges. He needed someone to cover it quietly, restructure the books, and take responsibility for an accounting error that would, on paper, look like negligence rather than theft. He needed it to be me. I want you to understand something, friends. I am not telling you this story so that you will think I was noble. I made a choice that night that I am still living with. And Dennis sat across from me, and he was shaking, and all I could think about was our father's face and what it would do to him to see his eldest son prosecuted. Dennis had a wife. He had 2 kids of his own, and he was my brother. I said yes. What that meant in practice was that I signed documents. I allowed my name to be attached to the accounting irregularity as an oversight on my part. I paid back the escrow shortfall out of money that Margaret and I had been saving for 4 years. And I lost my CPA license for 18 months pending a professional review board investigation that I could not fight without exposing Dennis. I told Margaret almost everything. I told her about the money. I told her about the license. And I did not tell her the full extent of what Dennis had actually done because I believed foolishly. I know that protecting Dennis meant protecting his secret completely. What I did not tell Rachel was anything at all. She was 4. then she was 5, but then she was 7, and I was working 2 jobs to rebuild what we had lost, and I was never home. And when I was home, I was exhausted, and Margaret was exhausted. And Rachel was a little girl growing up in a house where her father was present in body but absent in every way that a child needs a parent to be present. I told myself she was too young to understand. I told myself I would explain it when she was older. I told myself a lot of things, friends. The years have a way of making a coward out of good intentions. By the time Rachel was 12, she had a story about me that she had built entirely from observable evidence. The story was, "My father cares more about work than about us. My father missed my school plays. My father was not there when I broke my arm at soccer practice. My father sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him every weekend while other fathers were in the backyard." The story was not wrong. It was just incomplete. And here is the part I have to live with. Margaret knew the full shape of the truth. Margaret knew that I was working that hard because I had spent our savings covering for my brother. She knew that the second job was because we were rebuilding from a hole I had fallen into trying to protect family. She knew, and she stayed, and she loved me through it, and I am grateful for that every single day. But Margaret never told Rachel either. I think she was protecting me. I think she believed it was my story to tell, and I kept not telling it. And the silence between my daughter and me grew into something that had its own weight, its own architecture. By the time Rachel was in high school, it was a permanent structure between us. Not hostility, not yet. Just distance. The polite, careful distance of two people who have stopped expecting things from each other. When she was 16, she said to me one night, very quietly, over dinner, "Dad, do you even like being here?" I said, "Rachel, I work this hard for you." She looked at me for a long moment and then she went back to her food. That was the wrong answer. I knew it was the wrong answer when I said it, but I did not know how to give the right one without opening a door I had kept closed for 12 years. Rachel went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship. She studied communications. She was sharp and driven and magnetic in the way that people become when they learn early that they can only rely on themselves. I was proud of her in the way you are proud of a river for finding its own path with a little grief mixed in, because you know the river did not need you to get there. We spoke on the phone every few weeks. The conversations were cordial. She came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and performed the rituals of a family that was mostly fine. Margaret was the bridge between us. Margaret always found a way to make the table feel warm. Then Margaret got sick. It started as fatigue in the fall of Rachel's senior year. By January, it had a name: early-stage ovarian cancer. We caught it at a stage where the prognosis was genuinely optimistic, and Margaret was Margaret. She faced it with a matter-of-factness that made the rest of us feel like we were the ones who needed taking care of. She went through treatment. She lost her hair. She grew it back. By the time Rachel graduated, Margaret was in remission, and we let ourselves believe the worst was behind us. Rachel moved to Chicago after graduation. She built a career in marketing. She got serious with a man named Patrick who had a steadiness about him that I respected. They bought a condo on the north side, and she was, by any measure, doing well. We talked more during Margaret's illness than we had in years. Fear has a way of burning off the distance. For a little while, Rachel and I found something almost like ease with each other, but Margaret's remission lasted 4 years and then it didn't. The cancer came back in a different place, more aggressive, less willing to negotiate. We spent 2 years fighting it, and I want to say that those 2 years were the most clarifying of my life. I was there. I was present in a way I had not been when Rachel was small, and I know it is a bitter thing to be better at being a husband at the end of a marriage than you were in the middle of it, but I was. I was there for every appointment, every treatment, every 3 a.m. when the fear woke Margaret up, and she needed someone to hold her hand and tell her the same thing I had been telling her since that accounting class in 1986, that she was going to be okay, even when I knew she wasn't. She died on a Wednesday morning in April, 61 years old. The room was quiet and the light was very still, and I held her hand until it was just a hand. Rachel flew in the night before and sat with us at the end. And in the weeks after, something shifted in her that I did not fully understand at the time. The grief hit her like a structural collapse. Margaret had been the interpreter between us, the one who translated my silences into something Rachel could live with, and now the interpreter was gone and we were left alone together with nothing but the old unspoken story between us. I could see Rachel looking at me differently in those months. I could see her reassembling the history of our family without Margaret there to fill in the gaps. And the version she was assembling was the only one she had access to, the one where her father had chosen his work, chosen his absence, chosen everything over her, for 30 years. I told myself I would sit down with her and explain everything. I told myself that after the estate was settled, after the holidays, after things calmed down, I was still telling myself that the morning of my retirement party, I had worked for the same regional financial firm for 26 years. They threw me a retirement party at a banquet hall in Dayton, the same city where I grew up, which felt meaningful in a way I couldn't quite articulate. There were 60-something people there. My colleagues, some clients, neighbors, my brother Dennis and his wife, a few of Rachel's childhood friends who had stayed in the area. And Rachel. Rachel flew in from Chicago. She wore a dark green dress and her mother's earrings, and she looked so much like Margaret when Margaret was young that it stopped my breath when I saw her across the room. We hugged. It was the careful hug of people who are trying. The dinner was warm. The speeches were kind. My supervisor told a story about me that made the room laugh. My guy, Dennis, gave a toast that was generous and gracious, and which I watched him deliver with the full knowledge of what it had cost me to allow him to stand in that room as a free man. And then Rachel stood up. She had not told me she was going to speak. I saw her pick up the handheld microphone, and I hoped that she was going to say something about her mother, something about love, something that would close the distance between us in front of people who cared about both of us. She looked at me for a long moment before she started, and then she said it. Every word. She said that I had been physically present and emotionally absent her entire childhood. She said she had spent decades excusing my absence as dedication, only to realize as an adult that dedication to your family and dedication to your career are not the same thing. She said she was tired of performing gratitude for a childhood that left her feeling like a footnote in her own father's life. She was not yelling. That was the thing that was hardest to absorb. She was calm. She was precise. She had rehearsed it. The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system. I looked at Dennis. He was staring at the table. I put my hand in my jacket pocket and felt the envelope there, and I thought, now. Give it to her now. Stand up and give it to her before she leaves. But my legs did not move. My voice did not come. I sat there with my hands flat on the tablecloth, and I let her finish, and I let her walk out, and I let the moment close behind her like water. I drove to Rachel's hotel that night. I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I had the envelope on the passenger seat. I had written it 3 days before the party, 12 pages, the first honest accounting of my adult life, beginning with the night Dennis came to my kitchen table and ending with an apology that I had been composing in my head for over 20 years. I went inside. I knocked on her door. She opened it. Her eyes were red, but her face was composed. She looked at me, the way you look at someone you have been bracing for. I said, I know you don't want to talk to me right now. That's fair. But I need you to take this. I held out the envelope. She looked at it like it might be something that would hurt her. What is it? She said. It's the answer to a question you've been asking your whole life. I said. And I'm sorry it took me this long to write it down. She took it. She didn't close the door on me. She just stood there, holding it. I said, I love you, Rachel. I loved you every single day. I know that doesn't fix anything. But it's true, and I should have said it more, and I should have shown you what it cost me to love your uncle the way I did, and I didn't, and that is on me. That is entirely on me. I turned and walked back down the hallway before she could respond. Because I had learned, finally, at 63 years old, that some things need to land without an audience, even the one who has waited the longest to say them. She called me at 2 a.m. I was awake. I had not even tried to sleep. When I picked up the phone, she didn't say hello. She said, Dad, the money, Dennis, all of it, this is real? Yes, I said. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing. The papers. 18 months without your license, she said. That was when I was in 2nd grade. You were working the night shift at the hardware store. Yes. I thought you just didn't want to be home. Want to, s? I know. Another silence. Longer. Why didn't you just tell me? She said. Not when I was little, but later, when I was old enough. Dad, I've been angry at you for 15 years. And this is the part, friends, where I had to give the answer I had been avoiding for a very long time. Not the comfortable answer. The true one. Because I was ashamed, I said. Not of what I did. I'd do it again. But ashamed that I'd made such a mess of explaining it. Every year that went by without me telling you, the harder it got. And I think I know I was also afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd be angry at Dennis instead of at me. And Dennis has his own family, and I didn't want to burn that down, so I kept carrying it. And I let you carry the wrong version of me. Silence. That's not fair, she said. No, I said. It wasn't. None of it was fair to you. She was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, Mom knew all of this? Most of it. And she never told me either. She was protecting me, I said. Just like I was protecting Dennis. We were a family that was very good at protecting each other from the truth. I heard something shift in her voice then. Something that had been tight for a long time going soft. I said terrible things tonight, she said. You said what you believed. I gave you reason to believe it. That's not Dad. I humiliated you in front of everyone you worked with. Rachel, I said, and I had to stop for a moment because my voice was not reliable. You are my daughter. You were 4 years old when I made a choice that I never properly explained to you. Whatever you said into a microphone tonight doesn't touch what I owe you. She cried then. Not the composed, rehearsed version of herself from the banquet hall. The real version. The one that still knew how to be a kid in her father's arms, even over the phone, even at 2 in the morning, even after everything. I let her. I stayed on the line, and I let her. And I did not try to fix it, or summarize it, or tie it up. I just said, I'm here, and I meant it in every direction, present tense, past tense, and every tense still to come. She came to the house the next morning. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Dennis had sat 30 years ago, and started all of this, and we talked for 4 hours. Real talking. The kind our family had never been good at, and I have decided it is not too late to learn. She had questions. I answered them. Some of the answers were hard. Some of them, she needed time to sit with. She asked about Dennis, and I told her the truth about that too, and I watched her face work through something complicated and arrive somewhere I didn't expect, not rage, but a kind of exhausted compassion. She said, he should have been the one to carry this, not you. Maybe, I said, but I chose to. Why? Because he's my brother. And because I thought I was strong enough. I paused. I was wrong about how long I could carry it without setting it down somewhere wrong. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. The same hands. She has my hands. I don't want to waste more time, she said. Neither do I. Then let's not, she said. And that was it, friends. No grand proclamation, no ceremony. Just a father and a daughter at a kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, deciding to stop building walls out of silence and start building something else. I think about the people who love each other from a distance, who mistake endurance for devotion, who carry secrets they believe are acts of protection and find out decades later that the secret was the wound. I was that man. I spent 30 years believing that doing the hard thing quietly was the same as doing the right thing. It is not. They are not the same at all. Rachel called me last Sunday. She and Patrick are coming for Thanksgiving. She wants to cook, which means she has become her mother in at least one important way. And that is a gift I did not expect. And if you are someone who is carrying a story that the people you love don't have access to, I want to say this to you as plainly and as directly as I can. Write the letter, make the call, drive to the parking lot and go inside. Don't wait for the right moment. Don't wait until the grief is smaller. Don't wait until it's comfortable. Because the weight you're carrying, it doesn't disappear when you're gone. It lands on the people who loved you, and they will spend years trying to make sense of it without the key. Give them the key while you're still here to explain it. That's all I know. That's the whole story.